I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet. I hail from Meanjin, Brisbane, but I'd like to acknowledge that this work represents the whole of our southeast Queensland. The southeast Queensland spans lands and seas, waters of the Barungam, Bigambul, Danganbalun, Gitabul, Jagera, Jinibara, Kabi Kabi, Kondamuka, Turrbal, Waka Waka, and Yagara, Ugarapul. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this week is National Reconciliation Week, and food systems are a great way to actually recognize the reconciliation connections that have been taking place in this region for millennia. Southeast Queensland is a place where people come together and have been doing so for thousands and thousands of years, and we continue to do that. Multiple cultures, young and old, come here and actually connect. And there's testament to that across the region, from the Bunya Mountains in the north to the Great Dividing Range to the west. And so we'd really like to celebrate that coming together and connecting. And this Southeast Queensland Food System Strategy is testament to that, to actually coming together from different voices that represent the region to come forward and do something different that we want to, setting those goals that we aspire for. So I welcome you to actually put in the chat where you come from and what countries you represent, and in doing so, we celebrate that coming together. And as we begin this session, I'd like to just introduce how we're going to run this. We'll be doing this in 3 parts. We'll start with an introduction from Scott and Larelle as leaders of this sort of space in the Southeast Queensland region, and I'll introduce them. I'll just ask that we please go on mute. I can hear someone speaking in the background. Can't see that. And then we'll move on to a presentation about the strategy, which will be, done by the team. So Cathy, Peggy, and Nikki will be going through that, and I'll introduce them along the way too. And finally, we actually wrap up with some reflections from the governments who lead this space. That will be Mayor Geoff McDonald and Commissioner Rachel Chambers, and I'll introduce them as well as we go along. We'll finish off with some Q&A and get us talking together. If you have any questions along the way and if they're burning, put them on chat and I'll monitor them for you. And of course, I always forget to do this. I forget to introduce myself. I'm Lily Lim-Camacho. I'm from CSIRO, and I actually was I engage in the food system, and I try to represent and bring people together. And this is what we're doing here, is actually featuring some work that we've done to actually bring food systems together. Without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Scott Smith, who is the CEO of the Council of Mayors of Southeast Queensland. Scott, the Capricorn, this is what we talked about, is going to just talk about, how this came about. And of course, there's Larelle McMillan, who will follow as well. Larelle is the Research Director of the Agrifood Systems sort of area in CSIRO, previously called Sustainability, one of the champions of this space as well. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Lily, and welcome everyone, and mindful that we've got people from all over the country. So a little bit about Council of Mayors Southeast Queensland, so a regional advocacy body for the 11 councils in Southeast Queensland, from Noosa down to Logan out to Toowoomba, and welcome Mayor Geoff McDonald, Mayor of Toowoomba, who's the chair of our 2032 Leveraging Working Group. We have been in existence for 21 years. Our role is to advocate for better outcomes for our region, our residents. We've done a lot of things over those years, but probably the most significant and what brings us to the conversation today is we led the charge for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and very proud to have done that. And the reason we did that, and the linkage to this, is to get obviously the better outcomes for our region, both transport, economic outcomes, jobs creation, as well as bring global trade and investment and bring ourselves to the awareness of others across the world, and the Games was the best vehicle for us to do that. That prompted us off the back of that, given we put that effort in and we wanted those outcomes, for the mayors to continue to drive legacy outcomes from those Games, because obviously we weren't there to just get the 4 weeks of sport. We wanted a long-lasting legacy. So we created the Leveraging Working Group, which, as I said, Mayor McDonald chairs, and out of that we look for opportunities for improvement of our region's outcomes. And one of those was to look at economic outcomes. If you look at the profile of our region, we have a lot of productive ag land and related industries to food, both innovation, other parts to the food system across our region. We're a diverse range of councils. And so we saw an opportunity with people coming to the region for the games to leverage that, to amp up the opportunities for that very sophisticated food system across our region. And we saw a perfect opportunity to leverage it so we get benefits beyond the games like everything else we've been doing. So off the back of that, we partner with CSIRO and again acknowledge the great work that the team's done from CSIRO, and you'll see some of that today. So it's been an outstanding opportunity for us as government leaders. Some people ask, why would we do this? Because we're local government. The reason we do it is because as a region and as a collective group of mayors, our mayors look beyond just what their day-to-day job as a mayor is, and they look for these great opportunities to deliver better outcomes for our region, the games being one of those, and the food system strategy and the implementation that will follow this is something the mayors continue to be passionate about to help their communities and help grow the region. So I might leave it at that, Lily, and hand over to Larelle.
Thank you, Scott. That's such a great way to start off. I'll pass over to Larelle.
Thanks, Lily, and thanks, Scott, and thanks, Mayor McDonald and Commissioner Chambers. It's great to have you on the call today as well. So this is a really exciting moment for South East Queensland. Seeing this South East Queensland food system strategy move into its action agenda phase, it isn't just a milestone, it's actually a signal of what becomes possible when we have research, government, industry, community, and our Indigenous peoples come together with a shared purpose. Everyone on this call will understand the complexity of shaping a food system that's sustainable, nutritious, inclusive, resilient to shocks, but still delivers on the economic strength and the food security that our regions depend on. Yet South East Queensland is showing that whilst this kind of work is very hard, this work shows that we're talking about today, it shows that this can be done. So this strategy marks a real shift away from the fragmented planning that we usually see in regions to a coordinated region-wide action approach. Exactly the kind of approach we need, I think, as we face multiple shocks. In this case, as Scott mentioned, we've got climate volatility, rapid population growth, some fragile supply chains. We'll hear a bit more about these soon. And preparing for a major global event with the Olympics and Paralympics on their way. At CSIRO, we're also working with the Australian Government on the top-down frameworks, if you like, the National Food Security Strategy and the National Biofeedstock Strategy. And I think we have some folks from DAF here today, because that nexus between energy, food, water and community is becoming central to our national resilience and our national identity. What's powerful, I think, about the work in South East Queensland is that it offers a scalable model for other critical food regions across the country, and in fact, the Asia and Indo-Pacific region. It helps communities ask what matters most here. What are our biggest risks? What are the biggest opportunities? What defines us? It gives us a platform to build from together. Imagine if we paired this kind of bottom-up, place and evidence-based planning with strong national policy settings. If we looked at our food bowls through a food, energy, water, community lens across the nation, we could create an evidence-based pathway towards a future defined by sustainability, equity, healthy communities, resilience and prosperity. Before handing back over to Lily and to the panel of fantastic scientists that we have here today to unpack some of the science methods used in bringing this strategy to bear, I thought I'd also just briefly mention this will be the last of the Food System Horizons webinars as we know them. Our funding for this initiative comes to a close next month in June. And as the Director of our Agrifood Systems Program of Research, I just wanted to assure you that we'll be continuing to partner on research in this space and utilise the folks who subscribe to this webinar series to share that progress if you wish. So in the coming month, I just wanted to flag that we will be in touch to ask if you'd like to stay engaged in these kinds of discussions. Thank you, and over to you, Lily, and to the research team.
Thank you, Larelle. Thank you, Scott. And I just wanted to acknowledge the leadership that this takes. So these things don't happen by, a snap of a finger and magic. It is concerted work. And I just wanted to acknowledge the amount of leadership we actually have supporting this work and doing the grunt work. And thank you, Larelle and Scott, for that. I will now hand over to the team that I'm so glad to be part of. Just wanted to introduce you to three amazing scientists who represent the work that actually that has been put into this. Cathy Robinson, who leads the team and the strategy. I won't go into detail of backgrounds and all that. I'll let the team introduce. Peggy Schrobback, who does a lot of the analytical work in this sort of space and her background in supply chains and economics. And also Nikki Dumbrell, also background in economics and doing a lot of grunt work as well, looking into the games and what it means for the future. Over to you, Cathy, Peggy and Nikki.
Thank you, everyone. And we are doing a bit of a team effort here. I just want to acknowledge also our other fabulous authors and contributors here. So, Maya, if you're managed to get online, because I know you're knee deep in other work, please raise your hand. And David Reynolds, who I also think I saw on the scene there, but also Michaela, who in the ComSec world was absolutely critical as part of this. This is literally a strategy that's been built by a village. So I also want to acknowledge the people who helped us with all the various forums. So EK, if you're there, can you just make sure you give yourself a bit of a wave? The fan network, which was unbelievable, and that allowed us to do another whole round table. And Gala Watson, who helped facilitate the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander roundtables, couldn't make it today. She apologises, but is available to help because it was really important that we provided unique safe spaces for those voices to be heard. So on that, in the chat, I'm going to ask Lily to put the links here because we're going to just give you a bit of an overview of a ride. So if you want to read the book and get into the details, we encourage you to do so. But we're just going to be highlighting some of the research that we did and how we did that in a co-design and collaborative way. So let's put this into context here. There's a lot of questions around this co-designing positive food bowl transitions. We know that our food bowls are under pressure in Australia and around the world. Those pressures are happening for a range of reasons, whether it's water, drought, population pressure, you name it. So this is quite timely, as Larelle said, in terms of the way in which we approach this, so that it's not just an academic exercise, but actually is a co-design and that can stick in the institutions and stick in the decision making, but also to work in an inclusive way so that we can provide that with realistic transition pathways. So let's go. Nikki, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So let's talk through the approach. We're going to go through this, and this is how this little talk is going to be structured. I guess part of this methodologically was understanding the state and features of food values and goals. This is not an insignificant exercise, and part of this was to really focus our efforts and the way in which we collected data, why we collected that data, and for what purpose, but also to recognise that the food bowl approach and that systems-based approach means that there was multiple food values and goals to consider. Secondly is good governance to support shared responsibility for food system strategies. I would like to acknowledge the absolute collaboration we got with Queensland Government, who shared data, regional councils who shared insights and reports. Everyone leaned in here. And so we really had to work with a collaboration approach here where people could work with what they had and gave what they could in quite a short period of time. So this isn't, this took about 6 months to do, which is quite extraordinary really, and so really required everyone to lean in. And of course then start to think about what happens at the other end. Co-designing of those sustainable food system priorities had to work with a pragmatism, and what we mean by that, there's no funding around A, B or C. We had to work with what we had and then work to see what we could leverage with what's on the horizon. So I just want to acknowledge on the right-hand side here, you can see that we've got at the start of the process is us starting to think through those goals, and at the end of the process, of course, was all of us celebrating. It was quite extraordinary to hear and see everyone celebrating this effort, and I think that's the testimony to the process where we all felt like we owned the strategy by the end. Next slide, please. All right, so let's go through each step. So first of all is that food values and goals. So we sat down with the leveraging committee and started to think that through. And key to that was really not just another plan that sat on the shelf, although it can sit on your shelf. I guess part of that process was to make sure that it could actually work into existing institutional pathways, plans and priorities. So we made sure that we took note of the range of plans and efforts that were going on around this region in particular, and also the voices of mayors and key players in the system to build a very holistic set of goals for us to work with and values. I guess key here is think about what this looks like in your own food bowl region. It might look eerily similar. And part of this was to think through that there's a city region population, ecologically sustainable and resilient food systems. We want to create well-designed food environments for communities. We want to make sure our food can move efficiently with world-class infrastructure and, of course, build a globally competitive food powerhouse. There was a lot of effort then to start to think about, all right, how do we start to align them with existing strategies and plans? Who do we need to work with to start to work that through, both from institutional pathways, as always, data gathering and getting the evidence together, but also to line that up to some of the other goals and strategies around the system. Next slide, please, Nikki. So good governance across an interconnected food system is what we start to think about. There are many food bowls within food bowls, and someone's not on mute. If you wouldn't mind getting on mute, that would be delightful. Thank you. So this, in this particular region in southeast Queensland, there's food bowl regions within food bowl regions. There's some local government areas as part of this process who are interconnected by supply chains, by systems and markets and partnerships outside southeast Queensland, and also the diversity of food values and voices within their own local government areas and across the region. So this did require us to think very carefully about, rather than just opening this up to everything and everyone, because we only had a short amount of time and you know, we can only go so far, was to be really clear about why we were getting data or evidence, and really clear about why we had to start to think through where that evidence bearing could have on some of this process. Next slide, please, Nikki. So we sat and had a great workshop with the leveraging working group and started to think about the two scenarios that we wanted to work with as part of that exercise. So in that was about where we wanted to go to our future, so that's where our goals were, but we put two scenarios, well, we were given two scenarios to work with. One's a long-term one, the impacts of growing population on this particular region, and what did this mean for these food values and goals. This might sound eerily similar to other food bowls around Australia. But the second was event-based. In this case, it's an impact of a mega sporting event with the games coming, but also a focus on that the games was not about the stadium, it was about the region and all the food values and opportunities that could provide. I kind of wonder though, if we sat down today, if that those scenarios would be slightly different. But I still think the method still holds because we know that these various shocks that happen in our systems through various external or internal events mean that we need to be pretty agile in terms of approaching this with different scenarios. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Peggy now, who's going to just give you a little deep dive into some of the key areas that we started to focus on. Over to you, Peggy.
Yes, thank you, Cathy, and hello everyone, good afternoon. So one of the kind of key focus areas that we identified and as a result of our research was this one here, strengthening the unique food bowl that supports the growing population. And underneath that, we identified three different themes. So the first theme is to know your system through evidence-based analysis, protect the productive capacity, and ensure an equitable access to food. And I will present some examples of what that means and what our research showed. Nikki, next one, please. So This slide here provides some information about the population growth that's expected for the next few years. So at the moment, you see here in the darker shades that we have different populations in different LGAs across our region, but you also see the red tops of that bars that a significant number of people are expected to come and live in southeast Queensland. And if you look very closely at Ipswich, for instance, you will see that population is expected to more than double in the next 20 years. So this means for food that we need to cater more food. So for more food in terms of quantity needs to be supplied to this region. It also means that we likely have more migration as well. And that means people with different backgrounds come to this region. At the moment, we have about 30% of people in Brisbane, Logan, and the Gold Coast who have an overseas background. And we know culturally their food habits are quite different. Often traditional food habits are more healthy compared to the modern diets, and that is something that needs to be catered for in the supply. So it's not just more food, but also specific types of healthy food that should be supplied. Next one, please. Another angle that we looked at is the land use. So we wanted to identify or clarify what is the area of land that is actually available across these LGAs, and where is the opportunity to grow food in this region. So you see here we have the powerhouses or the agricultural land available in the Lockyer Valley, in the Scenic Rim, Somerset, and Toowoomba, really, to undertake most of our agricultural production in the region. So overall, across southeast Queensland, there's about 63% of land currently allocated for agricultural practices. Next one. And then, of course, we looked a little bit deeper of what we actually grow in our region in terms of product volume and also value. And we found that production is very diverse. We have vegetable production happening in our lovely Lockyer Valley. There's also quite a bit of meat chicken production happening across the region, for instance, in the Redlands area and in the Sunshine Coast LGA. And then we have Toowoomba, of course, with cattle production, with grain production, and also egg production. So really kind of diversified areas where our food is currently grown. And that is also represented in the gross value of production. So we estimated, based on ABS data, that about $2.48 billion are generated from the production of agricultural goods, with minority shares taken up by vegetable, poultry, livestock products such as milk and eggs, and cattle as well. So it's really important to understand the local diversity here as well. Next one, Nikki. Another key area that we identified is the need to protect our productive carrying capacity in the local area. So we undertook some estimation using CSIRO's transit model to identify where is the food that is locally supplied at retail level actually coming from. And we found that about 44% of the food supplied in retail at retail level is sourced locally from within southeast Queensland. And 21% comes from interstate, and 25% is imported. So it is really important to protect that local capacity, the land available, but also other resources available that go into the production capacity, because we know that locally produced food generates employment. It is also typically of fresher quality. But we have to be mindful here as well. We need a little bit of a balance because we know that our region is very exposed to climate shocks. We have reoccurring floods. We recently had a cyclone as well. So we know that our food supply chain is under threat, if you like, from all sorts of disruptions. So that's why, and having a balance in the supply is important. Next one, please, Nikki. So, and another example is the equitable food access and affordability. So we very briefly looked at that using the consumer price index for Brisbane as a capital, one of the capital cities. And we found here that in the past, the consumer price index for Brisbane appeared to be higher compared to the national average. We did not have the opportunity to undertake an analysis as part of this project to explain why that is the case, but one of the reasons could potentially be the vulnerability of our region, impacted yield due to climate shocks, etc., that impacts the prices as well. Another example of data that we used from a recent Food Insight questionnaire showed that about 19% of the households sampled in that survey identified as having a low food security, and 13% even identified as having very low food security. So that is obviously an issue that affects our community and needs to be addressed. So in summary, we just wanted to give you here a little bit of an indication about what is possible in terms of describing a food system, using different sorts of data to look at the food system, and which is helpful to generate information or suggestion for a food strategy in a specific region. And this is just a kind of a blueprint that could be used for other regions as well. And that's, from my perspective, where the interesting part would start, comparing across region. What is going on and why are some patterns perhaps the same or different? So that probably is future work for us. Good. And I hand over to Nikki.
Thanks, Peggy. Just like Peggy, I'm going to move us along to a similar format for a few slides talking about our strategy and our scenario. When you saw the two scenarios that Cathy presented, we had this long-term population growth, and Peggy's talked us through some of those things. And the other thing that really helped us focus in this work was feeding mega sporting events. So underneath this theme, we have, again, three themes. One is, how can we leverage the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, not just the event in the stadium, but what's happening in the whole region, the lead up to that event and the legacy of that event? And how can we enable enduring regional benefits? So not just the stadium again, not just the time and place, but how does this build opportunities or help us confront risks for beyond that event? And showcase Southeast Queensland's food identity. And we had a bit of a focus on the 2032 Games, but it's not confined to that. It could be other sporting events that can be helpful for us to learn and look at in the lead up to 2032, but also an approach that we could take for other events, not just Olympic and Paralympic game events. So we'll move on to the next slide that just takes a snapshot at that first piece of the leveraging the 2032 Games. So it's not an easy thing to figure out exactly how many people have been going to and eating how much food and all those sorts of things at previous Olympic and Paralympic Games. There's quite a lot of literature out there that says things about the wants, needs, demands, how kind of assessments happen after Olympic and Paralympic Games around sustainability, around food, around health, around sport. So we've got a few pieces here just to highlight today. The most recent Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris, we know that quite a few local people attended and went to events and visited stadiums. We also know a few million people came from outside of the region. So in that case, we had 3.1 million people come from outside of Paris, including from overseas and the rest of France, to attend that event. And back when we had the Sydney 2000 Games, we had 1.6 million international visitors come into Sydney at that time. So something in common with what Peggy's just said about the region population. That means we have a lot more people to feed and cater to at that time, but it also means we have a whole range of different people coming into our region. The athletes are a tiny proportion of this. Athletes will make up a few thousand people. And so they have their very specific dietary needs and those sorts of things. But we took a bigger and broader view than that. We focused a lot more on visitors, who's already living and working in this region, and what's happening in the agri-food system outside the stadium as well. And one of the key things that we're noticing in particular as we kind of move through time with Olympic and Paralympic Games, a core thing that you need to be able to demonstrate before you can win an Olympic and Paralympic bid, as well as a key thing that you sign up to when you commit to these things, is sustainability. So the Southeast Queensland region has already demonstrated that they have some attributes and some characteristics and some capacity to deliver this and to deliver in line with a number of constraints and requests and requirements of hosting these events. And so it's an opportunity for Southeast Queensland to continue to show that competitive advantage. And it's also an opportunity to use this event to help build a sustainable legacy as well. And how do we work towards this event, or how do we think about leveraging the 2032 Games? One thing we can do is look at what's already working well and succeeding in the region, and how can we scale those things? And that's a whole range of different experiences and networks and learning from each other, as well as business models and how we produce food, consume food, and move it all in between those pieces, right? So there's a lot of focus on producing and consuming, and there's a lot of things that happen in between those steps as well that we can focus on different models for. Second, we took a really close focus on enduring regional benefits, right? And this has been a really important thing in the planning for and the setup and the how do we get towards these Olympics. It's been notified, I guess, in a lot of documents that are really formal, but it's also been something that we've heard a lot in our forums and events all around the region. So what does it mean to plan a Games for the region? And part of this strategy document that you can all download and have a look at off the internet is a whole series of what might it look like and what are the opportunities for the different local councils and local government areas in Southeast Queensland. So they all have a view on this as well as big top-down reporting documents. And a couple of things that we'll just highlight here for today that are key to achieving this are we want to understand the aspirations and the benefits that are of interest to the communities that are going to host these mega events, as well as be most affected by these mega events. So what are they saying that they would like? What are the benefits that they would like to see? And how can we help work towards those? One thing we can help work towards those using is a strategy like this document that also comes with a whole series of data made available in different formats so that this can be a living document and we can keep working, using this and iterations of this until 2032 and beyond. And we'll just call out here that forums really highlighted socioeconomic sustainability benefits and connecting food, people and places. And that was a really cool kind of way to summarise all the different, more than 200 people attending forums telling us what would be a real success metric for an event like this. And the last one from me is, Peggy said earlier, we've got a whole series of things here about what we produce and where we produce it. The Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2032 are scheduled to happen toward the end of July and into early September. So we have a seasonality element to this as well. So we have what is available, but also what does Southeast Queensland want to show off to the world? What do people want to come to Southeast Queensland to enjoy? And so what is Southeast Queensland's food identity? What are some of the flavours and the types of food and the experiences that people would be looking forward to enjoying? So something we did as part of this effort was look at, what is the way that we want to position and show Southeast Queensland to the world. There's a really nice quote here on the slide about this being an opportunity to signal culture and value of our, to the world. So food isn't just food in an isolated sense. It says a lot about our culture and our community and how we like to present ourselves to the world. And on the right hand side of the slide is just a really short list of types of food broken into fruits and nuts, vegetables and some animal source foods, and some color coding, which I'll walk you through to show you what's available if we went right now to provide a whole bunch of food to the local population plus millions more people in Southeast Queensland at the time of the Olympics. So if a box is white, it means that product is typically not available at that time of year. If it's pink, it means it's available, but we're pulling it in from somewhere else. We're not growing it in Southeast Queensland. And if it's this plum colour, then we're growing it in Southeast Queensland. It's in season and available at that time. Not necessarily enough of it to be in season to provide enough for everyone in Southeast Queensland, let alone the Olympics in Southeast Queensland. And if there's a little white arrow, it means we're producing more than we need in Southeast Queensland at the moment. So they're the types of products that we have more than enough of, that we are making a surplus. So things like strawberries and broccoli, we produce lots of those in Southeast Queensland. Things that we don't produce lots of, that we might like to have an opportunity to showcase at the Games, will be things we'll need to think about different ways of making sure that they're available or an option at the Games. So that's it for me, and those three kind of key themes from the mega events part of our strategy. And now I'll hand to Cathy for the next bit.
Thank you, Nikki. And so just to finish off then, there was kind of, so we've thought about some of the work that Peggy was showcasing that came from various pieces. We've thought about this scenario of particularly as the population grows, so that was kind of like the first scenario. We've got the second scenario around that event-based shock, both a celebration and a shock. And I guess bringing that together then is that third parcel, and how do we start to grow South East Queensland as a food innovation system? And again, we had some 4 key pillars as part of that effort around harnessing the data and evidence innovation that we have at our fingertips. So let's start to work our data harder, to think about innovative value creation, to utilise Indigenous food knowledge, and of course align our food system values. Again, just to finish off, we'll just highlight some of the key insights that we've had from this, but we do urge you to go to the document if you need to. Look, harnessing data innovation is an interesting one. You've heard some pieces here around, we collected a lot of data. We had really thoughtful forums where we brought people together to think about those scenarios, think about those goals and those values, and starting to give us some both local, industry and community views on it. But there was quite a bit of work that we all did together, which was to start to make sure that that data was used and useful. So that was partly done in the way in which the strategy was structured. Again, Nikki just highlighted some of those local government area pieces, which we worked really hard with the local government councils and communities around them to say, right, what's your own particular local government area part? That process made sure that each local government could both showcase both their opportunities and challenges that they're seeing with those scenarios, but also see what each other's doing. So there's some initiatives that are going on in South East Queensland that are extraordinary. They're utilising procurement policies really innovatively through food. They're starting to think through partnerships in around sporting events that we didn't know about. They're starting to really highlight some of the food security issues that's affecting multicultural and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So this actual exercise of having this forum, and we really, again, shout out to ComSec and those partners in the leveraging group, enabled us to show this in a really collaborative environment and say, here's our first go. And then we'd be able to send that back out into the systems and they say, yeah, but if we've got this, or this is something you've got to think about. So it was a very iterative process as that was co-designed. On the left-hand side, you heard some great graphs and numbers, and some of you might have got excited, and others of you might have found that, you know, a bit harder to work with. So we did pay a fair bit of attention to trying to think about, well, what does this do? What does this translate for? The what-if question. And so that was forum after forum that we engaged with, but also you can see the way in which the strategy operates. We just had these little snapshot works, which we worked with Michaela on, and the team at ComSec to say, right, what's some of the key vignettes we really want to do? And again, shout out to our government industry partners who are very fantastic with reviewing parts of this document, highlighting some of the key messages, again, so that the end of this strategy was shared. Next slide, please. Innovative value creation is not just about making a broccoli strawberry smoothie and value adding to the food of South East Queensland food in an Olympic Games venue. It's also this point of the network. And so what we really realised and tried to support was allowing industry, community, government agencies to start sharing stuff together. So here's an example from our fabulous Food Connect co-hosted workshop. And again, you can see where the goals are sitting on the table, the scenarios are sitting on the table, and just curating conversations around this to say, right, what are some of the pain points? What are some of the opportunities? And what can you do now? And what should you do in the future? And again, creating that network around this space, including this forum today. Next slide, please. I really want to shout out to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community here because there was a real lean in as part of this process. This was done, you know, as we said before, this strategy was done in a very tight timeline. We wanted to honour safe spaces to be able to enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices and enterprises. That is not an insignificant job. So I worked with Gala as part of that process. It was fantastic, but again, I just wanted to give a big shout out to those enterprises who are all listed in our report. But here's some of the kind of highlights there of starting to make this very, very point that for many First Nation enterprises, innovation lies in revitalising traditional practices, developing ethical supply chains and embedding cultural values into contemporary markets. So one roundtable was really focused on that opportunity space. What was the opportunity that was desired, particularly around the Games event and the region around it? But there was a second roundtable that we then were asked to provide, and that was really important around food security. So what's some of the pain points both now and in the future? And this is where we started to realise that food security strategies needed culturally appropriate pathways and that services are often funded to address specific issues in isolation, even though families are experiencing food insecurity alongside housing stress, health challenges and financial instability. We made a concerted effort then to bring all those voices into the whole strategy rather than just an add-on at the end. And so you can see the summary of this strategy, so it's kind of on one strategy on a page in a way, and that's unpacked in only a few pages so that you can really rip this out at the start and you can see that this has been the overview of this presentation. So that first pillar about strengthening a unique food bowl that supports the growing South East Queensland population, feeding that mega sporting events and starting to think about South East Queensland food innovation system has both a whole bunch of key parts of that system, but also a really big chunk of that strategy document that is quite big and chunky is actually the evidence behind that. It's been curated so that everyone can use it. It's been designed so that everyone was part of the process of its co-design. And we made sure that we presented that so that it could be worked at local government and regional, industry and community perspectives. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you very much, Cathy, Peggy and Nikki. That was awesome to actually deep dive a bit in strategy. And I know it doesn't even cover probably 3/4 of what we did. There's so much in there, which is why I kept on sharing the links, because for people to really deep dive, go into it, there's just so much more. I'm gonna wait for us because I've seen some questions in the chat. Some of them are answered, but some of them are worthy of discussing as a group. So I'm going to progress us on to the next stage of this discussion, which is reflecting on it. I'm going to just spotlight. I'm going to put, sorry, give me 1 second to stop spotlighting certain people and I'll bring them back later. And I'm going to move on to say hi, Nikki. Bye, Nikki. I'm going to go to Rachel and Geoff. So wait 1 second. Where's Rachel Chambers? Rachel, say something so I can there you are.
Hey Lil.
There you go. Because so many people, it's hard to find people to spotlight. There you go. I just wanted to introduce our 2 guest speakers for this panel who are actually really representing this tension we have around scales and food systems. So scales of governance in this instance, but you know, food systems are made up of so many different actors and so many different levers. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Rachel Chambers, who is the Food Farmers Commissioner for Queensland Government. Rachel has been a long-standing supporter of Food System Horizons in various hats even previously, and has always been there to give us a litmus test of how is this going, or how should we be approaching this? What sort of questions would you sort of critique us with? And of course, there's Mayor Geoff McDonald, Mayor of Toowoomba, but also the chair of the Leveraging 2032 Working Group of the Council of Mayors of South East Queensland. Mayor McDonald has always been a supporter of this work and was always really good at giving us challenging questions when we're actually going through the decision making of this sort of space. Really good to have you both here. And I just wanted to ask for people in the audience to actually just put yourselves on mute, because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback here, but just so we can actually hear the good conversations. I'm going to start off with some just reflections on the strategy and thinking about your roles. You both have very different roles, different spaces that you operate in. But we'll start off with you, Rachel. Tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing, because is it still new, relatively new?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and how, what are your reflections of the Southeast Queensland strategy?
Okay, I'll start because I'm sure, I speak at events and I say, hands up, who knew Queensland had a Food Farmers Commissioner? And still, people don't know. And that's totally fine in that Queensland started with a Food Farmers Commissioner in an interim position late 2024. It was a year-long interim position. I was appointed in late October 2025. And with that appointment, I was so excited because the appointment came with an expansion of the interim position into food security. And anyone who knows me was like, okay, if you put food security in a sentence and you name me a Food Farmers Commissioner, I'm there. And so that then was about, okay, well, what does this mean for Queensland? And, anyone who doesn't understand commissioners' roles, and there's a lot of people who don't, a commissioner's role is basically a person who is independent, who is non-political, who is appointed by the government to sort of problem solve. So to go through problem solve. And so I am here to try and problem solve my way. And I say that my mission is to translate food security into measurable actions and outcomes for Queensland. And I say that with intent because food security, it's like the word transparency. It means it's in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't mean the same thing across the board at the moment. So I've really enjoyed the last 6 months in saying, how does Queensland lead this space? That I think it's great. We've got so many things happening in this space, the food system horizons and the work the CSIRO does, and then the broader work, the procurement work, the whole range of things is the origins are in Queensland. So I know we are a state full of leaders and complex thinkers in this space. So for me, the work that we're doing is like I said, it is about secure food. So prosperous farmers secure food is our vision. We have our mission of unpacking food security into measurable actions and outcomes. Under that, we see food security through 6 major lenses. Those lenses, we ask a question. So there's the productionist lens. Are we producing enough food? There is the health and nutrition lens. Is the food we're producing a positive influence into health? There's an economic lens. There's an access and equity lens. There's a resilience lens, and there's an environmental and stewardship lens. I'm not saying that those 6 lenses are the be all and end all. I'm saying I had to start somewhere in a leadership role and that I'm up for the challenge. So challenge the office in the next, few years in, is that the lens that we all should be looking through? I make no excuses in that I am a productionist lens first, because unless you grow the things that produce the nutrition and the cultural value and the food and the birthday cakes and all those other things, then you have nothing to build upon. So that's why my role is food farmers, because those two go so well hand in hand. Out of those 6 lenses, we then look at 14 critical inputs. So, the thing that we're currently looking at, and I loved, Cathy, what you said about whether you would frame the strategy in the same way if you were in the same situation. I looked back at a speech I made in December last year, and I wouldn't frame my speech in the same way as the speech I'm making tonight. But I think what we're all saying is we have to get better at mapping the system, because the system hasn't been mapped with enough data and evidence that we can throw any scenario at it and be able to pave our own path through it. And I think that's what I got from this strategy. It's and Lily, I told you last week, I think I've read up to page 84 of the strategy. I will finish the strategy, but I've read the chunk of the strategy. Sorry if anyone was mentioned after that. And what I saw was a great foundation of work that I want repeated across Queensland. I think that's where the value it comes from, is that ability to have that foundational work done, and then regardless of if we have a fuel or fertiliser or agri-chemical issue or a biosecurity issue, any of those things then can be scenario mapped over the top. So that's what I got out of it. I also really enjoyed the data gaps that you identified. And I think that's a piece of work that, for me, my office will follow up, because it's one thing to identify data gaps in a strategy and another thing to operationalise how we're going to have actions and outcomes out of it. So yeah, that's my wrap up of the strategy. Thanks, Lil.
Perfect, Rachel. Well, you missed out the reference list. Sorry. But thanks for that. It's a really good reflection, because when we started the Southeast Queensland strategy, we weren't really looking at food security in the classical sense of it. We were looking about the events that could actually make things worse or better. You know, it could go anywhere. And so we knew that there were drivers. And I think one of those was you know, the games, of course. So the Olympic and Paralympic Games that the region, Queensland as a state, will actually have in 2032, and the question of what could we make out of this beyond. So Geoff, I'll hand over to you and ask for your reflections of this body of work and what it means for the many roles that you take in SEQ.
Good on you, Lily. Thank you. Rachel, thank you. Lovely to hear from you. One of the areas, almost a question I noticed for Rachel, actually, in regard to one of those pillars around economics, is the supply of personnel and labour into this market as well. We're certainly seeing that across the food production areas that we have, and you know that well with your history as well. But I think, Lily, firstly, to CSIRO and all the government departments, thank you for what you've done to partner with ComSec, and I really appreciated you calling out the efforts of Michaela as well. She's, I think, lived and breathed this from the start, and so acknowledge Michaela's work and that of Scott Smith as well, who's here to take the glory, but obviously didn't do any work. So thank you for that. But to Cathy and Nikki and Peggy, thank you for your insights as well of what this is. And I think, you know, Rachel, you picked it in regard to the data capture. And then what do we do with that, and how can we actually put that into an implementation to actually make it meaningful for people? And that's what I'm really excited about from a ComSec perspective. For leveraging 32, it's really important for us that we look beyond 32. And therefore the conversations, particularly around, Peggy, you were talking about the food habits and types of foods. And if you look at the chart that's come through from the data already collected of what's available at that time, and the opportunities that may present for us, keeping in mind that we produce 20% of Queensland's agriculture, but we only provide ourselves with 44%. The rest of it's done outside. So, you know, there is a lot of scope and opportunity, I think, to take out of the strategy. And the fact that it's a living document, I think, is really important because this will shift, whether that's through transportation, product to market, all the things we've mentioned, climate variability, you know, all those sorts of things are added into that. And I do think that based on our research here, labour, the availability of labour is one of those other ones as well that becomes variable too from time to time. So look, I think it's a really sound strategy, and I thank CSIRO for the work that you guys have done, because this is the start. And I guess the highlight for the leveraging group is the fact that so many groups have come together to collaborate. And true to Rachel, the Commissioner's comments, you know, this will take the collective to keep putting that data in. And that is sometimes the biggest challenge, to find ways of progress, is to get accurate data. And, you know, everyone's busy in their own life doing what they're doing. Sometimes getting that data is a bit of a challenge. So I think that's a phase for us as local government. That's certainly where we can help to a degree with some of our producers. You know, you've seen the charts in the strategy about how much is produced for us locally in the Toowoomba region. You know, 80% of the eggs that are consumed across Queensland come from our area, and you know, the cattle on feed, there's quite about 60% of the total of Australia's is done in this area. So we're a high producer of agricultural products, the largest in Queensland. That's why we're really keen to help ComSec and help CSIRO with this project. And then you lean into the Lockyer Valley, Somerset, Scenic Rim, and you see the statistics there. We are, as a Southeast Queensland, a very high producer of this product. So that's why the 6 pillars, Commissioner Rachel, that you mentioned, are spot on. they seriously are spot on. And I guess I could just look at that opportunity around the people that are employed now in the industry, by and large, are quite different to what they had been historically, and that is changing through technology as well. Anecdotally, I was at a cotton farm, so it's just not food, it's fibre as well in some of these areas. A cotton farm a couple of weeks ago, and we're seeing folk who have gone for another career and started to come back in their mid-20s, early 30s, in that age bracket, to come back and work on the farm. Electricians, accountants, lawyers, they're actually coming back to region. That is an area that we as local governments could actually celebrate and help add to the story of food production, food security and food systems. So there's overarching observations, Lil, and thank you for all your work you've done too.
Thank you. No, that's lovely reflections. I just wanted to ask both of you, one of the big things, and this is off script, to be honest, but it just came up to me. One of the big things that we started with at the beginning of both Food System Horizons and also this strategy is the concept of systems thinking, the concept of food systems, and making that real. And often when you use the word systems, it becomes this academic term. Sure, you can talk about it in vague sort of concepts and diagrams and all these sorts of things. But I think one of the things that this work has shown is that it's real, and that there's parts of the systems that are not very visible and others that are very visible. I'm going to start with you, Mayor Geoff. From your perspective, is the food system more complex than what we actually talk about it to be, or is the reality more complex, or how does that play out to you on the ground now that you've experienced this food system conversation, and as you talk to your constituencies and all that, like how does the food system reality play out for you?
Oh, look, I actually like the term, to be honest, because it's different to what other strategies use, systems, and it actually is a whole, you can use production. The term paddock to plate was something that actually resonated with a lot of people, that they can see in their own minds, that you can see an egg being laid and then you can go and see a scrambled egg somewhere, or you can see a cattle in the yard and you can go and see a steak on a plate. Those sorts of things, in actual fact, were a food system, but it was never called a food system because it actually showed where something starts, where it potentially finishes. What this does is actually go beyond that and talks about the waste as well, food waste, how we deal with that, how you get the product to a restaurant, how you start from a technology perspective of growing in different conditions and using technology to help from a scientific perspective. That's where I actually like the term food systems, to be honest. Personal view, probably, but I think it's different to what I've heard so many strategies being talked about in the past. It is very complex, and therefore it needs all the data along each of those system elements to be able to measure what you're trying to achieve, which the Commission is doing a great job setting about what they're trying to do. Getting it into more practical terms is where you need to sort of segment, almost like the 6 pillars. You need to segment each of those areas and work on them differently, potentially differently, but they're part of a full system. So I actually like the term, to be honest. I think it works well.
Rachel, it must be a challenge and also an opportunity in the work you do as well, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And one of the things that I was excited about in my ACT was the ability to, and don't quote me, but you can look at it, it's the ability to access information across all state government entities, so all GOCs, so government-owned corporations, all local governments, and all state departments, in order for me to do my job, fulfil my obligations. So for me, having the ACT allow me to look across, and then also set up a framework of which Queensland then, I can help Queensland embrace the systems view if I can look across and access information and have those conversations across Cabinet. I think that was the exciting opportunity for me. One of the examples, and this is just a this week example, where I think the time is now for systems thinking. The time was 100 years ago, but when's the best time to plant a tree? And is the packaging conversation. So food packaging, so currently if we look at a fuel issue, we look at a petroleum-based product issue. So we go from in a supply chain, one that maybe not comes up in every kind of strategy that you've got on food, but you've got a petroleum-based product, you've got a packaging issue, you've got a government with a packaging policy and a packaging intent, but the lens that they're seeing packaging through is a waste lens. It is an end of product lens. And what I'm trying to say is, unless we have a food conversation in every conversation, we're missing the point as to why that packaging existed in the first place. So the packaging existed because you have to deliver food safely across not just the nation, but across the world. A lot of our milk moves overseas in UHT containers that are not recyclable. There's a whole, or very, very difficult to recycle, which then impacts local government, and the costs in local government in waste are extreme. So you look at it, and it is a system. What we haven't done well is mapped the system to explain to decision makers in a very easy way. And I say it's not anyone's fault that if they don't understand the food is a system or a complex. It's just that we haven't educated people. It's still a new term. Even people in food are not using that systems-based thinking, etc. So I think that the opportunity is now, and there's a really huge opportunity to educate others. And I think once you start to lift everyone to a certain level, they'll get it, because intuitively you're like, oh, of course, like you said, Geoff, the paddock to plate stuff, people went, oh yes, I get it. There's a egg here and it gets on my plate. Now what we're trying to do is raise the capability of Australians to see a much more complex and in-depth viewpoint of food, when 87% view food as the supermarket shelf that delivers it to them. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think it's we can't give up on the systems thinking. I think that's where the answer lies.
Great, brilliant. And now you're making me think of another area, which is sorry, systems thinker. Looking beyond to 2032, beyond that, actually beyond 2032, I want to think of what success looks like for you two. You come from different perspectives. I have my own views on what success would look like, but I want to hear from what you think. What would be like some indicators that we're heading the right direction with this strategy? So start with you, Rachel, and then I'll pass on to Geoff.
I love TED Talks. And has anyone watched the TED Talk on the How to Start a Movement TED Talk? And they say it's the first follower. So it's not so much the leader, it's the first follower, because the first follower turns what I think they say what looked like a nut job into a legitimate path to follow. That's where I think we are. I'm not calling anyone nut jobs. I'm saying.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, no,
that's probably a compliment from me. I've got to be honest. So thank you.
So it takes one to know one as a previous mayor. So I think that for me is success. Is there are a lot of entities at the moment playing around. So nationally, there's the National Food Council, the National Food Strategy, Feeding Australia National Food Strategy. There's this happening. There's, like I said, the procurement stuff happening. There is stuff happening everywhere. For me, and I think someone might have just said it, it's how we bring that all together in a more, you're never going to be able to get everyone together, but in a more cohesive way to achieve some results. That would look like success for me, is if it didn't look like there were so many different leaders, but it looked like that there was a body of followers who actually got it, and there was some kind of churn in this food security. Australia is, I got asked for my opinion this week. My opinion is Australia is not food secure. Australia has a very high level of food production capability, but the risks across those 14 inputs are always there. Biosecurity, overnight it can change a whole thing. So as far as food secure, I don't think we're there yet. But we have an enormous capacity to give it all we have to be a very secure food nation. So that for me would be what success looks like. If people start talking about food security, instead of the whole viewpoint is Australia is food secure because Australia produces more than they eat, that is not the way that I want it to look after 2032.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, Geoff, what are your thoughts on
Thanks,
success?
Phil. Yeah, no, thank you. I think Cathy penned this phrase some time ago when we first met, which is to make data work harder. I think it was Cathy said this in one of our meetings. And I think there is so much data that we all collect on a daily basis. Local governments are notorious for data. My God, there's so much that gets thrown at you. But what do we do with this? So I'd love to think that this whole food systems process actually helps us to understand how to read and leverage data better than what we have it. And that will take scientists to do that. It'll take people out on tractors. It'll take people out on trawlers in the ocean. It'll take everyone to actually understand what is this, how do we make this data work? And that would be, for me, it's a pretty simplistic thing, but that would be success for me, because the data will hopefully identify the gaps which some of this strategy and the system strategy has done. But more importantly, it will then help us hopefully not identify them only, but actually find ways to rectify it. And I totally agree with Rachel in regard to the difference of food security and food abundance. They're different things because that can change on a whim for us as a nation. So look, that would be success for me, is make data work harder and actually let data-led decisions help us. With the advent of AI technology and what we're doing at the moment, it's using that. I'll give you an example. So Atlas, which part of the SEQ city deal. So it's federal government, state government, and ComSec working together. Atlas it's an innovative precinct in Toowoomba that's being set up. It's got 25 million through the Innovation Economy Fund through the SEQ city deals, and it'll bring all of the smarts together, if you like. So data abundance will be there. It'll be overflowing with it. But their job then is to work out innovative approaches to improve food security, food resilience, looks at all of those things. So to me, when that's up and running and operating, that'll be part of that success story of actually making data work harder. And they'll have the smarts from all around the world based in our region, in the southeast Queensland. So we'll be able to leverage that. That is a great example of how governments can work together to set up an entity and then get out of the road and let them do their work. And I think that would be hopefully a great example and a success story out of these discussions. The other, of course, is success on waste, the FOGO, food organics. And we see that already with the multi-unit dwelling setups for that. That's already starting to take place. I think make data work harder is my key. And I'm sorry, Cathy, I've stolen it off you, but it's now recorded, so it's mine. And then distilling that data, understanding what it means, and actually helping frame up solutions for all the things that this strategy has identified as potential challenges and equally opportunities for us.
That's brilliant. And I'm going to riff off that, Mayor, and keep you for one more question before I have my final question for Rachel as well. Okay. If another region in Queensland or another LGA leader came to you and said, Mayor McDonald, I want to have a go at doing a food system strategy for our region, what sort of advice do you have, to make sure it's successful?
Yeah, look, I would say don't hold off any longer because as a nation, we need to all work together, to be perfectly honest. And this is where Rachel will work with her other state and territory counterparts, if there is one. And if there's not, perhaps that's another leader that the Queensland Government has, is to encourage that. Look, I think this is the start of something so critically important for our nation. That it needs all areas. This was a ComSec initiative, but there's absolutely no reason why this can't be Queensland-wide. And when you look at the opportunities that we have with variability of climates, Queensland is the most prevalent for natural disasters. So we need to work with other states and territories and see what is there. And again, a lot of data-driven assistance will help do that. So I would say, Lily, my message would be contact CSIRO and get them on board with you, because there's a lot of the work you've done will be replicated and will be similar to all of those that are online here today. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's just all work together as a nation. It's these things don't stop at lines on a map that are borders, whether it's a Queensland, New South Wales, other than the state of origin time, or local government jurisdictions. It doesn't stop. Growing takes place across borders. So let's make this nationwide.
It's true. Thank you. And Rachel, what about you? What could the benefits be for Queensland if we saw this across? You mentioned it before. We want to see it across the state. What could it mean for Queensland if we did?
Yeah, I do, because when I read the strategy, you should see my notes. It's and particularly coming from a local government background, and like Geoff said, knowing the data that is collected, and data is collected for a specific purpose, and it can't be used for other purposes. And there's a whole range of things, there. And we have to get better at working out those kind of things, because also farmers and ratepayers hate double sharing data. So we've got to work out what that balance looks like. But I wrote all over it, and I'm like, oh, I need this. And that's where that information comes from. Oh, I see it now that, the business numbers can be from local government. And I can see that if I need a report, so I do an annual report, or we'll do an annual report each year. And I'm like, oh, I want to map food entities' business numbers, because I want to understand how food is translating in the small business world. And I've been talking to the Small Business Commissioner about how we better map an agricultural food-based small business, other than, in using those sort of ABS statistics. I'm meeting with the federal ABS data collectors next week to try and align those kind of things as well. But you said it, Geoff. We can't have a movement that has got a state boundary. You can't have a movement that's got a regional boundary. I can't have a movement that's got a state boundary. We can have somewhat of a big movement as a national boundary, but food is a global resource. So, we do have to understand the globe in this whole food system. But I think the biggest thing that we need to do is make it national. So make all these things national. To your point, Geoff, when I started this job, this is a 3-year appointment, so I've got another 2.5 years for outcomes. I said to the minister, I will tell you, it's a new appointment, whether this position I felt was useful, whether we were able to provide outcomes, and I will tell you if I didn't. And already I would be a true advocate for one of these positions in every state to do the work that we're doing with it, a national overseer. And I see the National Food Security Strategy and the National Food Security Council, and I think the only difference with me is coming from an industry point of view and having that independence of political nuance, then I'm able to bring people together who maybe would not usually talk together in the same way. And I think that is a special part of being in that commissioner role. But I think definitely it needs to be broadened. And I know that, none of us can save the world alone. We're going to have to get all of those second and third movers to start a movement.
Thank you very much. Now, I have taken too much of your time and actually want to open up the room to questions. So before I do that, I'm going to switch off recording. Thank you for listening to date, and I will move us on to Q&A and feature everyone